in this area of the world, green algae are pretty common. Um, and so we actually used to have a class in our department called algology, and because one of the plant people, that was his specialty. And so he had a ton of green algae in his live specimen system. That was really nice. But when he retired, that kind of faded away. So they're definitely plentiful in this area. And, that's when they started examining algae, green algae in particular, they noticed so many characteristics that are similar to the higher plants, the land plants that and so that's why they were considered to be the ancestor. Green algae are gaining again in interest for applied uses and human uses. And so certainly like sushi and things like that, we have foods, but they're looking at, although sushi's not green algae, but fuels, using them as fuel cell technology for the generation of hydrogen gas. There's a green algae that's being used for that, Chlamydomonas reinhardtii, and then as a source of biodiesel. So they're trying to look at green algae. They're fairly, especially the single-celled ones, they're easy to work with and grow in the lab.
I was about to say, last summer I was a part of some research, and people that I was working with were also trying to do the algae in the gasoline, especially for people in Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have so much algae, but it's like very expensive to import a lot of gas. So
Yep.
they're trying to make it like
Mhm.
where it can become into fuel, so they can have
Right.
a fueling system.
Just manufacture it right there.
Pretty much. But
Yeah.
it's cool that you mentioned it because I was
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah, I think it's going to become a thing, green algae, especially in the world of algae, they're very versatile and also they're looking at sources of food too. I'll mention that in a minute, but yeah, this biodiesel idea, and then she's retired now, but one of the chemistry professors was doing some work with green algae not too long ago. Trying to remember what her research question was. I think she was looking at their ability to remediate contaminated aquatic systems, but I can't swear to that. I'd have to give that some thought. Petroleum. So this one, Botrococcus brownii, which is being shown here. So it's, this is the algae. And then all these are the oil droplets that it's synthesizing and excreting. And so these are long chain hydrocarbon lipids, essentially, and they like this particular green algae because it excretes it out. It doesn't keep it in its cells, so it's much easier to purify it and get the living cells away from what you're going for, which is the hydrocarbon in this case. And so they're looking at that as a potential source, renewable source. I haven't heard much about it though lately, but I know that they are looking at that. I think maybe scale up issues might be a little bit of an issue.
See it in like their commercials, like Exxon, like these big algae pools.
Do they? Okay, so they're
Showing.
still, yeah,
But,
at
yeah.
least they're, yeah. So hopefully there might be some stumbling blocks. Yeah. So in fact, they're starting to suspect that some of the ancient shale formations that they're mining for petroleum may have actually been due to the presence of green algae all those millions of years ago producing the oil. And so I think once, some people started to realize that that could be the case, then they kind of went, oh, well, maybe then we can use green algae currently and get them to do this. So that's a thing. They're also looking at, can we use green algae in space? Whether they, going to live on other planets, we have to have certain things that other planets don't have, like oxygen. And so they're looking at this, if you think about oxygen tanks, bringing oxygen with us, at least so far, we haven't figured out a way that can be done because it's just too heavy. Chlorella is a green algae that can generate, of course, a lot of oxygen because they're doing photosynthesis. And they're also looking at that for food. Chlorella is an algae that can be eaten. And so right now, some companies are touting it as it's a superfood. And so they do note that it's high in protein, vitamins, except for vitamin C. And the reason that it's making it into the superfood category also is that if it's easy to digest, that's a definite plus for some of these ideas for food production. And of course, if you're the one manufacturing this product, you want a fast growth rate to make some good profit and lots of it. So they're looking at that. So Craig Venter is a businessman slash, I don't know if he has any scientific credentials himself. I mean, they say he's a geneticist. Well, let's put it this way. He's not a plant biologist. He was involved in the Human Genome Project. Yes. So he was a businessman that said, I'm going to do my own human genome project in my business. And so he was a private business owner that did that in conjunction with the government's Human Genome Project, where that was back when they were trying to sequence the human DNA, all of the human DNA. And back then, they thought human DNA would have, I think they estimated like 46,000 different genes. You know what we ended up with? You know how many genes are on the human DNA? About 13,000, way less than they thought. There's other organisms and plants that have way more genes than we do. And so it's kind of interesting. But anyways, Craig Venter was famous for that. So then after he did his part with the Human Genome Project, then he went to the oceans and he got fascinated with algae in particular. And so this is a interview with him and a write-up on that, you know, and he's under the belief that this could be a thing where we could use algae much more than we do now in terms of helping to feed enough people, you know, feed all the people on the planet. And as well as some of the other ideas of, you know, oil production. And so he's been trolling the seas, I guess, for many, many years now. And when he realized that there's so many different algae out there, he really kind of zeroed in on that. So you may hear more about him and some of his discoveries. And then this is just trying to show you that in the business world, people are starting to pay attention to algae and they're starting to realize their potential in different applications. And so, you know, here you're looking at the idea of oil and food again. So you can even grow your own. So here is a prototype that it's in the testing stage. I don't think this is commercially available yet, but it should be soon. Anyways, they tout it as algae, and I got upset by that because they're using spirulina, which is not algae. So they did not consult a plant person when they did their commercial, you know, their advertising. So I don't know, hopefully they'll switch that. But if they use spirulina in this system, that's actually a cyanobacteria, but it's still good. I mean, spirulina is a food source. And so very healthy. But this is like a homegrown system where you provide the adequate light and you know, buy the spirulina culture and put it in there and plug it in, and it's pretty to look at, and you grow your own. And then I think they're trying to get people to like add it into your smoothies and things like that.
It's probably a marketing thing, especially bacteria.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Some bacteria.
Right. Yeah, that's probably very true. Yeah. And you know, to be fair, this company isn't the only one that misquotes spirulina, and they often, many businesses I've seen that spirulina algae. I was like, no, typically not. But I bet that's they're kind of glossing over. They don't want to say cyanobacteria, although the old fashioned, and it should be nixed from our vocabulary because I have a pet peeve with it. But what's the old fashioned term for cyanobacteria? Blue-green algae, right? But maybe they should do that instead if they want to get away from that. But that just makes me mad too because they're not algae. But anyways, so spirulina. But here, this is just a flow chart, just trying, again, a visual, trying to show you that they're really starting to think about how do we scale up, how do we work with them and get them to do what we want. And the red box here is like, if I ask you on the exam of, what good are algae for humans, these would be some of the ideas to think about. So there was a algae conference, was it last year? And it was right in the Midwest. I think it was in Madison. I was bummed I missed it. I didn't find out about it till after the fact, but at that conference, they were talking a lot about these ideas, like how do we use algae to solve some problems that we're having in our world today. So green algae, I think, you're going to see more and more of that in the next decade or two. And I'm really excited. I think they've been kind of hidden under our noses all this time. There's a lot of potential there. So I'm really hopeful that we'll see some great strides in this area of research. Okay, brown algae. Phylum Chromophyta, they used to be called Phaeophyta, so you might see some older terminology with that, but it's been renamed to Chromophyta. So brown algae are commonly in the kelp body form, or branched filaments, so they're filamentous, but they tend to be very branched. You can have some that are microscopic, and certainly kelps are macroscopic. So did we get any brown algae for lab? We should have. We should have had at least one brown algae living sample.
Oh, we just had a dead one.
A dead one? Well, isn't nori red?
That was the red algae.
Red, yeah.
There was one by.
Yeah, there should have been brown, at least one live sample. So, they don't call it phloem tissue, but they say it looks like phloem tissue. So some species have that. So again, we see phloem in the vascular plants, let's just say that. And so again, showing the relatedness of algae. Fucoxanthin is typically what's giving them their colors when you look at them with the naked eye. They don't always look brown though. Sometimes they look greenish. So it depends. And then algin tends to be produced by these algae. It is part of their cell wall. It gives a very kind of, mucilaginous is probably the best descriptor to that. And the reason they put that into their cell wall is that it does give nice flexibility. If you can imagine living in the ocean, you want to be able to flex and bend with the wave action, with low and high tide issues. And so you want to be able to flex and bend, but not tear or get damaged. And so this algin in combination with the cellulose does help. And then because it's pretty heavy water content, it's a mucogel, so it's got a lot of water in it. That does help with if they experience low tide and get exposed, that'll keep them moist enough during that time period. It helps them stay buoyant as well. And so the textbook does have a table on all the different uses that we have for algin. So take a look at that and think about some of those ideas. Because I like to ask about, like, how do we use plants or algae in this case in our world? So if you live along the coastline, you may see something like this. And, when you look at the kelp forests, these are surface. This is in Maine in the tidal zone. The smaller ones, again, I think we had some slides that showed this kind of thing, and this is part of their life cycle, but remember, we're not getting into their, same with this one, that's part of their sexual life cycle. But we're not gonna get into that. I was just trying to show some different microscopic morphology here. And then, of course, the kelps with their more differentiated body form. So again, just like with the lichens, they call the whole thing a thallus. I tend to say body, but technically thallus is the word. In this mix of the chromophyta, we also have the diatoms, which are very different than what we just showed you. So very, very beautiful. Did you look at some diatomaceous earth? There's a tiny little vial of it. Oh, yeah, it's a tiny vial. They might have missed it when to set it out. If you didn't get a chance to look at it, we'll put it out again tomorrow. Or I mean, next week. So diatoms are very interesting. They have a lot of uses for human use. You can extract some good oils and fats from them. Actually, for nutritional uses, diesel fuel too is what they're looking at for this. They have silica in their cell wall, which gives them their very beautiful different shapes and designs. And so diatomaceous earth, you can buy that for your garden. If you add it into your garden, it helps keep certain soft-bodied pests at bay, soft-bodied forms of insects, because it has silica. So it cuts them and keeps them from attacking your plants. So diatomaceous earth is a, very safe alternative to using for pest control, certain pests anyways. But they're also used in like swimming pool filters. You can find diatomaceous earth packed into those filters. Toothpaste. Sometimes you can find that in toothpaste as a polish. I thought this was a great idea. The reflective paint on highways, the white lines and the dashed lines, they're now mixing in because when your headlights hit it, it really pops. I think that's a great idea. I hate that paint that's all flat. You can't really see it that well. So beautiful different shapes and designs because of that silica on their cell wall. Very, very interesting. Beautiful. I mean, you can create artwork out of this. A lot of people, if you go online, I think Etsy had some interesting artwork for sale with the diatoms. Hard to believe. I mean, that's just incredible. Such beauty. So we have them here in fresh waters. You can easily take some silt at the bottom of a stream or lake, and you can find diatoms too. They're there. This one was color, Photoshop was color. But this is some of the artwork I've seen. All diatoms. I mean, that you can hang that on your wall. It's very, very pretty. More artwork. And here's some nice petite little diatoms hanging out with some red algae. That was a really nice image. This was entered into a contest, the Small World contest that they have every year. The Nikon film company, photography company, puts this on every year. So that's a good segue into red algae, phylum Rhodophyta or Rhodophyta. Red algae, so should have had the examples of that in lab as well. You can find them in several different body types, morphologies, from small to big. They contain agar and carrageenan as part of their cell wall. Depends on the species, which version they'll have. But we've taken, making quite a bit of use of just these two substances alone when you consider the red algae. So agar, when you work with agar in class, when you were growing your microbes associated with plants, next Thursday, you'll work with agar again. you're gonna look at garlic, the ability of garlic to inhibit E. coli. And so you'll work with agar again, so those agar plates. So we still have no way to make agar synthetically. So we, like in my work, I always use agar to make Petri plates to grow my bacteria and fungi on. And then it took me a while to realize that you can eat agar, like it's part of your, like agar, they call it in the nutritional food world. And I'm like, is that the same thing? Apparently it is, but I'm so used to thinking of it as a scientific tool that my mind just wasn't going there, that you can eat agar. So, but apparently, yeah. Carrageenan, I knew a little bit more about that as a food additive, so agar and carrageenan are often used to thicken foods. Carrageenan, for example, is found in a lot of ice cream because it gives that nice creamy mouthfeel. When I was a postdoc, I was acquaintances with a master's student getting her master's in food science. So she would often talk about all the different things that they would add in and, for mouthfeel and all these different things of, so humans would find it, very pleasing and palatable and tasty. And so mouthfeel is like a real thing that they test and rate on the different foods that they're creating. So carrageenan you can find in a lot of different, if you look on the ingredient list, a lot of different foods, it's in there. Flexible and slippery for the plant. So again, for the red algae, it allows them to survive the action of the water. And it keeps them slippery. They think that the slipperiness can help with kind of like sloughing off if they get too well colonized by bacteria covering their surface. It can help like slough off some of the organisms that are growing on them. And then some red algae actually look like coral because they have a very hard body type. It's actually composed of calcium carbonate. And so they actually kind of look, I'll show you a picture. It kind of looks like coral. But yeah, we can't, so far, I don't know of any company that can synthesize agar. You still have to grow the red algae in like agricultural systems, but in the ocean. And you grow them up in big swaths. And then they have a special machine that will harvest the algae at time of harvest, and then they extract the agar from that and, bottle and sell it. So it's quite a production. Agar, at least, it's expensive. I don't know how it is if you buy it for eating it, if it's expensive. Does anyone know? I don't know either. Certainly in scientific realm, buying agar is super expensive. So because you can't just synthetically make it, you have to grow it and extract it. So Chondrus crispus is typically used as a organism to harvest for carrageenan. They use it in the beer industry. I think like White's Party Store sells it in small bottles in the beer making section because it supposedly gives a thicker head of foam on the beer when you pour and you're supposed to get a foam head on the beer after you pour it. And so it lets the foam, it kind of thickens it up and makes the foam last longer. And so just things like that appeal to people when they apparently drink beer. So they're finding uses for algae, not just the green algae. There's other uses that humans take advantage of. But again, they can be quite small. And there's the coralline algae, red algae. It looks very much like something on a coral reef. More feathery looking ones or seaweed looking ones. And then of course the wraps for sushi. How many people like sushi? Oh, so many.
Place.
Yeah. Is there a favorite place to eat sushi around here? So I think we got it from Meyer, but
error that come up,
I mean,
basically.
Before they got rid of Sushi King.
Is Sushi King gone or sushi?
Weird.
Oh, they're moving it. I heard what's the Japanese food? What's that one called? Tamaki and tea. I heard that one's gonna stay, but Sushi King might be going out. Tamaki is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because they have sushi too. Yeah. I have yet to really embrace sushi. I don't know.
It's
Yeah. Oh, I,
Try sushi.
where it's nice and fresh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
and not being shipped a couple thousand miles. Yeah, I think that fresh, I think would make a big difference.
they make it.
Do they?
Yeah.
Huh?
Day on Wednesdays at Fire.
Oh, Wednesday sushi day?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it seems pretty healthy depending on what you buy. I mean, it seems like it would be, I want to like it. I really want to, but just so far.
Start out with the one with cream cheese.
Start
Ooh,
inside.
cream cheese. I love cream
There
cheese.
you go.
Okay.
Ingredients.
Oh, okay. All right. That's a good game plan. I like that idea. I'll try that.
Like I don't know why people start putting it in there. That's not traditional. That's a California thing.
Yeah, but if it gets people to eat it and try it, then they could segue out into some of the other more
I-
traditional.
I use my chopsticks.
I have yet to learn chopstick. I do not have which is weird. I thought I could pick that up easy and I just can't. There must be a trick to it and I'm just missing it. So maybe somebody who knows how to use chopsticks really well can give me a primer on that because
Honestly, the only way is just double down and suffer until you figure it out.
yeah, right. Go hungry, then you'll figure it out. All right, so phylum Dinophyta or Dinophyta, these are the dinoflagellates, which are very, very interesting. Both marine and freshwater. They're they have two flagella, one that wraps around their body and one that dangles. And it has this like little cleft where it will wrap its flagella in there and then one just dangles free, but very interesting body designs. So they are the zooxanthellae, which live with sponges and corals and sea anemones. And so they're very much a part of the coral reef system and are, symbiotic with many of those organisms, but very interesting shapes and designs when you look at them under the microscope. And when you look at them move, because of the way they have their flagella organized, they tend to spin as they move. And so it's quite beautiful to watch videography of them. They just kind of look regal and it's really fun watching them move. Yeah, I don't know why they evolved to do that. Maybe it has something to do with, I don't know. Does anyone know? Like, why would they evolve that? Maybe.
Because when you're tiny like that, moving your water is like if you were trying to swim through like syrup as a person. So
Well,
you gotta do it.
maybe the
again.
aerodynamic of it kind of like idea. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this can be swims out.
Yeah, maybe it allows them to go faster.
Have to go into and like cut off their seconds.
And see what happens. I wonder if someone's done that experiment. That'd be an easy enough experiment, probably. So,
It's just the hardest. Actually doing that.
yeah, the microsurgery required. They get a bad rap in the sense of they're often blamed, they're part of the harmful algal blooms, and so it can be a problem. So the one on the left is the harmful bloom. Here on the right, you see some bioluminescence going on. By the way, bioluminescence isn't always caused by this type of organism. There's, like there's bacteria that bioluminesce as well. So it's not just them. But anyways, some of the algal blooms you really don't want to swim in because you don't know exactly what's causing it. And sometimes it can be a toxin being produced by the organism that's causing, showing that bloom. And, if you have the wrong type of algal bloom happening, you often can see then afterwards, fish washing up on shore, all dead. Because of course they need oxygen, they need a toxin-free environment, and they start to get attacked by the toxin. I'll talk a little bit about Pfiesteria pisidia in that regard, but just be careful if you're ever in that situation. You don't want to be around, especially the red tide idea. That's usually pretty dangerous. So this Pfiesteria was an interesting organism. Well, I mean, it's still alive and kicking, but it's a weird organism because it can morph its body into several different forms. It's an amoeboid form, flagellated form, encysted form. And so it's a cagey little organism. And this book is in Peter White's library. I read it one summer, catchy title, caught my eye. And the waters turned to blood. And so if you want to, I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but I put the synopsis in a couple slides here. You can read them on your own. But this became quite a saga down south because there was a beach that had a bloom of these organisms that was used, tourist season. You didn't want those beaches to be closed. And the scientists down there were saying, we need to be really careful. Apparently, when they isolate, they took the samples from the beach water and brought it back to the lab, and they isolated Pfiesteria. And one of the scientists who was working with it started to get Alzheimer's-like symptoms because of the neurotoxic effect. Super scary. Luckily, the other scientists kind of figured out what was going on. And once they got him away from working on the organism and got him treatment, he recovered. But it was a neurotoxin. And so the scientists are like, we need to close these beaches. And of course, the city commissioners and all those people are like, can't do it. It's height of tourist season. So this type of thing, unfortunately,
Don't beat the jaws bear.
yeah, right. So,
This one though, because it's algae, not sure.
yeah, right. It's, they can't see it. But there was like fish watch, and I'll show you a picture of this fish. I mean, look. And they still wanted to keep the beach open. So it's like, really? So anyways, there's this, you can read this on your own. This is a synopsis from the book, but interesting book. But again, like a cross between science fiction and conspiracy theory. So it's an entertaining read if you want to read something sciencey without a lot of jargon. Nicely done. Catchy title. So, and the waters turn to blood. So not all of them are, I mean, so you have to be really careful. You can't just assume if you see bioluminescence and pretty colors that it's safe to go wading. So just be careful.
The reason they do that is if little fish are eating them, they light up, and that way it's the bigger fish.
Oh, there you go, right? Yeah.
That could be a fun.
Yeah. Yeah, get a shark coming after you. Ooh. I haven't heard about that one. Magenta color.
They're telling people don't go in the water, drive short, solid. Those are-
Oh. That's scary. I don't know what bacteria, I mean, Vibrio is the genus that bioluminesces, but it's not really magenta color. It's more of a greenish, bluish.
Okay, yeah. Look it up. It sounds like a sulfur bacteria.
Sulfur bacteria. Huh, no, I hadn't heard about that one.
Yeah. Volcanic
Yes.
eruption,
Oh, maybe, yeah. I mean, one volcanic eruption.
maybe the Big Island where the active.
Yeah, the amount of sulfur that gets released is phenomenal. This,
Yeah, I found it is a.
yeesh. Yeah, there's, that's a really good point because sulfur is super abundant with any volcanic eruption. So sulfur loving bacteria
All volcanic island.
should be there. Yeah. Huh. Okay, well, we're gonna switch. I'm running behind a little bit in the we're supposed to be doing bryophytes and we're just getting to them. So we need to get into the bryophytes. So I was a little late getting here this morning because I was looking through a book on bryophytes and I just got lost in their beauty. And then I looked at the clock. I'm like, oh, I gotta get to lecture. So bryophytes. So this is chapter 20. And so now okay, so we've covered fungi and lichen, which, fungi hang out into that. And then the algae, which they hang out with the lichen, and then they, so we're making some nice segues here. Now we're getting into the bryophytes, which are the terrestrial plants. And when we look at the evolutionary process, they were one of the first coming in here on land. This is what I was reading right before when I was late. So Dr. Glein I'm sure she's retired by now, but she was a professor when I was a grad student up at Michigan Tech University, and she was a bryologist, and she was like the expert on bryophytes in the Midwest. So she wrote a book, nice little field guide. I'll leave it in lab next week so you can look at it, but really nice written field guide. And she named it mosses and liverworts, but there's a fair bit of lichens in there too. So if you like lichens, they're in there. But anyways, very interesting. So I can't remember if I told you this, but she would have dinner parties when I was a grad student there, and I didn't get to know her well enough because my research focus wasn't mosses, but she would give dinner parties where she'd invite grad students and her undergrads, some of her researchers. And it was such a, people were like wanting to get invited, because you'd walk into her house and it was just like this ode to bryophytes everywhere. She had terrariums, and I guess in her, she had like a large entryway with a fountain with, rocks, and like she had bryophytes with the water trickling down, and it just sounded so cool. I never got an invite. I wasn't on the list, but everyone would kind of get envious. You got to go. Oh man, so I put these in the reading and video section. So now we're thinking about this very drastic transition of going from the ocean system onto land. What an amazing feat. And so I'd like this is a short video clip. It's like 2 minutes long. Very nicely done. This, you just have to read the very beginning part. And then this is just a Word document where I copied and pasted a little bit about this idea. And so the green algae are known to have genes on their chromosome that allow them to, if they were turned on, they could get associated. It allows them to form an association with mycorrhizal fungi. And so the ancestor to terrestrial plants have these genes. And so they are thinking that's really what allowed plants to be able to make it on land, was that they partnered immediately with mycorrhizal fungi. And so there's a lot they don't know about it. I haven't read up. I'm not certainly in the know on a lot of the details of that, but there's been some nice, relatively recent research, really nicely showing that makes sense, that you have the green algae in that group as the immediate ancestor to what finally made it onto land and started to evolve and diversify on the land. And so bryophytes, were the first group that made it on. And so mosses on the top left, middle is showing an example of a liverwort, and then the hornworts are down on the bottom there. And so we're looking at very petite plants, no vascular system. So they're not like what we've been talking about when we went through anatomy sections where we looked at root stems and leaves. We're kind of not there yet. And so they're earlier in the evolutionary process than all of that. And so again, this is just listing in this slide set, the idea that green algae or the Chara are the two leading ideas for where the immediate ancestor to the bryophytes. And so you've already have this, well, maybe not all of it. The mitotic spindle is something new, but this is all just evidence that they point to. They say, well, you know, the green algae and the charophytes have this, and so do the bryophytes. So when you think about, oh, here's the picture of Chara. So Chara does kind of look moss-like. So again, lots of debate, interesting hypotheses, still have to work it out. But the bryophytes were here. And when first and on land, why is this not moving? There we go. So this is a very basic phylogenetic tree where they say, you know, green algae or the charophytes were the last universal common ancestor, and then you get this evolution and diversification idea. And so you'll see this again because it has a lot of the different plant, well, all the terrestrial plants on here. And then this typically means that they've gone extinct when you have it set like that. But if you look here at the way it's drawn, so if something is coming off right toward the base, like here, you know, so you see the liverworts, and then, so they're considered like the most ancient. And then you see a little bit of uptick here on the phylogenetic tree, and then you see the hornworts and the mosses. Okay, so when you have things coming off lower to the last universal, those are considered more primitive, right? And then as you keep going up the phylogenetic tree, so to speak, you get more evolutionarily advanced plants. So the bryophytes are, you got to think a little differently when you think about the bryophytes compared to the angiosperms and the gymnosperms. They're very petite. They prefer moist habitats, not always. You can find some notable exceptions, but the vast majority of all the bryophyte species they know of, most of them are found in moist habitats. They're all petite. They're small. They never get very big. We don't consider them to have true roots or leaves in how we define it. They often say they have rhizoids, which means they're root-like. They act like, they have the ability to attach to a surface. But when you look at them, they're just epidermal cells that were elongated. They're not true root tissue as defined. No vascular tissue, no xylem or phloem. There are some mosses that contain what we call leptoids and hydroids. So they're similar to vascular tissue, xylem and phloem, but different enough that you cannot categorize them that way. And not all have those. There's only some that have that. And so they perform similar functions, but they're not nearly as complex as what you see with true vascular tissue. So if they don't have vascular tissue, that kind of puts some big constraints on them because they can't grow really big because of that. They have less structural integrity, so they have less ability to fight gravity without that strong xylem. So that's something to factor in. And if they have no way to transport things around them, they have to just kind of do it throughout their whole body. And so basically they just absorb water and minerals throughout their whole body. It's not relegated to the roots have to bring up the minerals, for example. That's not how it works. And so now you can start to imagine why they need some moisture in their life, because they need to get that rain or fog in order to get their water needs met. On the other hand, if you don't have roots, you can live in some pretty interesting places because you don't have to rely on soil for your needs. You just get it through your whole body absorbing it. So they grow slowly, partly because of some of these issues. The only one that has a fast growth rate well, relatively fast growth rate is sphagnum peat moss, which is a controversial. We have a lot of human uses for it. It's controversial. Some people say it's a very unsustainable practice. Other people say, no, it can be sustainable if you know what you're doing. But anyways, so sphagnum is a noted exception. All right, we'll get more into bryophytes on Monday. Have a good weekend. Thank you.